The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, sliding through the mail slot with a whisper that somehow felt louder than it should have been. Principal Rebecca Walsh picked it up from the floor of Riverside High School's main office, noting the careful handwriting that spelled out her name in blue ink. No return address. No stamp. Someone had hand-delivered it. She turned it over in her hands, a strange unease settling in her stomach. In 23 years of working in education, Rebecca had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that whatever was inside this envelope would change everything. Mrs. Walsh. Her assistant, Maria, looked up from her computer. Everything okay? Rebecca realized she'd been standing frozen in the middle of the office, staring at a simple white envelope like it might explode. She forced a smile. Fine. Just fine. But she wasn't fine. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, but the words made her knees go weak. I know what happened to Daniel Park. I know what you all did. You have until Friday to tell the truth or I will. The paper slipped from her fingers, floating to the ground like a falling leaf. Maria rushed over, concern etching lines across her forehead. Mrs. Walsh, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. Rebecca bent down, snatching up the letter before Maria could see it. Nothing. Just some parent complaint. You know how it is. She retreated to her private office, closing the door with more force than necessary. Her reflection stared back at her from the window overlooking the student parking lot. At 51, Rebecca Walsh had worked hard to build a reputation as one of the best principals in the district. Riverside High had gone from failing to thriving under her leadership. She'd won awards. Parents trusted her. Teachers respected her. And now someone new. She sank into her leather chair, the letter burning in her hands. Daniel Park. The name alone was enough to make her chest tighten with a guilt so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. 2 years had passed since that night. 2 years of silence, of careful cover-ups, of living with a secret so toxic it had poisoned everything good in her life. Outside her window, students streamed across the campus, laughing and shouting, their backpacks heavy with books and their futures still bright with possibility. They had no idea that their principal was unraveling, that the foundation of their school was built on lies. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. With shaking hands, Rebecca opened her laptop. There, waiting in her inbox, was a message with no subject line. She clicked it open and gasped. It was a photograph. Grainy, taken from a distance but clear enough to recognize. It showed the back entrance of Riverside High, the same entrance she'd used that night. And there, barely visible in the sodium glow of the security light, was a figure carrying something wrapped in what looked like a tarp. The timestamp at the bottom of the photo read, October 15, 2024. 11:47 p.m. The night Daniel Park disappeared. Rebecca's mind raced back to that evening, to the phone call that had shattered her carefully constructed world. She'd been at home, grading papers when her cell phone rang. The voice on the other end had been hysterical, barely coherent. Rebecca, you have to come. No. Something terrible has happened. She'd driven to the school in a daze, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribcage. What she found there had been worse than anything she could have imagined. Another text came through. You're not the only one I've contacted. The others know too. Friday. Tell the truth or I will. The others. God, the others. Rebecca grabbed her phone and made a call. It was answered on the second ring. We need to meet, she said without preamble. All of us. Tonight. The abandoned warehouse on the edge of town had once been a textile factory, back when Riverside still had a manufacturing sector. Now it was just another monument to economic decline, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. It was also private, isolated, and far from prying eyes. Rebecca was the first to arrive, parking her car behind the building where it couldn't be seen from the road. She checked her rearview mirror compulsively, looking for headlights for anyone who might have followed her. The paranoia that had been her constant companion for 2 years had intensified into full-blown terror. The second car pulled up 10 minutes later. Coach Michael Torres emerged, his athletic frame tense with obvious anxiety. At 38, he was still young enough to relate to the students, popular enough that his football team's wins made him a local hero. He'd been named Coach of the Year just last spring. Tell me this isn't what I think it is, he said as he approached Rebecca. Even in the darkness, she could see the fear in his eyes. Someone knows, Michael. Someone has pictures. That's impossible. We were careful. There's no way anyone could have. I'm telling you what I received today. Rebecca pulled out her phone, showing him the photo. Michael's face went pale. "Dear God," he whispered. The third car arrived. Jennifer Blackwell stepped out, her designer heels clicking against the broken pavement. At 45, the school's lead counselor had built her entire career on being the person students could trust, the adult who would listen without judgment. The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. "This better be important," Jennifer said, wrapping her coat tighter against the autumn chill. "I had to cancel a dinner with my husband. He's already suspicious about my late nights." "Someone knows about Daniel," Rebecca said simply. Jennifer froze. All the color drained from her face. No, that's not possible." "It is possible. It's happening." Rebecca showed her the photo, watched as Jennifer's carefully maintained composure crumbled. "Who?" Jennifer demanded. "Who sent this?" "I don't know." The envelope had no return address. The text came from an unknown number. The fourth and final car pulled up. Marcus Webb, the vice principal, practically fell out of the driver's seat. At 62, he was the oldest among them, close to retirement, close to finally escaping the burden of what they'd done. His hands shook as he walked toward them. "Tell me you figured out who it is," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "Tell me we can fix this." "We can't fix this," Michael said, his voice rising. "Don't you understand? Someone saw us. Someone has evidence. We're done." "Keep your voice down," Rebecca hissed. "We need to think clearly. Panic won't help." "Panic?" Michael laughed bitterly. "We covered up a student's death, Rebecca. We disposed of his body like he was garbage. What's happening now isn't panic. It's justice." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and guilt. "We did what we had to do," Jennifer said, but her voice lacked conviction. She'd said the same thing 100 times over the past 2 years, trying to convince herself it was true. "Did we?" Marcus asked quietly. "Or did we do what was easiest for us?" Rebecca thought back to that night, to the choices they'd made in those desperate hours. Daniel Park had been 17 years old, a senior with straight A's and a full scholarship to MIT. He'd also been the star witness in a scandal that could have destroyed all of them. It had started 6 months before his disappearance. Daniel had been staying late at school working on a robotics project in the engineering lab. That's when he'd stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see. Marcus Webb, the trusted vice principal, had been skimming money from the school's budget for years, hiding it in false accounts, using it to pay off gambling debts that had spiraled out of control. Daniel had evidence. Spreadsheets, bank statements, emails. He'd been meticulous, the way he approached everything in his life. And he'd been naive enough to believe that reporting it through proper channels would result in justice. He'd gone to Jennifer Blackwell first, trusting that the school counselor would help him do the right thing. But Jennifer's husband worked for Marcus, owed Marcus favors, and Jennifer had convinced Daniel to wait, to let her handle it quietly. Then Daniel had gone to Coach Torres, whose football program had received generous funding from those same embezzled accounts. Michael had everything to lose if the truth came out, his program, his reputation, his career. Finally, Daniel had made an appointment to see Principal Walsh. But before that meeting could happen, before Daniel could expose the rot at the heart of Riverside High, there had been an accident. Or at least that's what they'd told themselves. "We need to go to the police," Marcus said suddenly, his voice firmer than Rebecca had heard it in years. "Before whoever this is goes public. We need to confess, take responsibility. It's the only way to." "Are you insane?" Jennifer's eyes flashed with anger. "Do you have any idea what that would do to us? To our families? I have 2 kids in college, Marcus. 2 kids whose tuition I'm barely covering. If I lose my license, my job, if I go to prison." "If we don't come forward, we'll definitely go to prison," Marcus shot back. "At least this way we might get some leniency for cooperation." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "We're not making any decisions tonight. We need more information. We need to find out who's doing this and what they want." "The letter said to tell the truth by Friday," Michael said. "That gives us 3 days." 3 days to find this person," Rebecca agreed. 3 days to figure out what they know and what they plan to do with it. "And if we can't find them?" Jennifer asked. The question hung unanswered in the cold October air. Rebecca barely slept that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that terrible night 2 years ago. Daniel Park's face haunted her dreams, young and hopeful and so terribly trusting. She'd loved being a principal once. Loved the feeling of shaping young minds, of creating a safe space for learning and growth. Now, every interaction with students felt like a mockery, a lie built on the grave of a boy who deserved so much better. At 5 in the morning she gave up on sleep and drove to the school. The building was dark and empty, the hallways echoing with her footsteps. She went to her office and pulled out the file she'd hidden in the back of her locked cabinet. Inside were newspaper clippings from October 2024. Local teen missing, read one headline. Search continues for Riverside High student, said another. And finally, 6 months later, Daniel Park case gone cold, family seeks closure. She remembered the press conferences, the carefully worded statements about how the school was cooperating fully with investigators. She remembered Daniel's mother, a small Korean woman with eyes red from crying, begging for anyone with information to come forward. Rebecca had looked that woman in the eye and lied. Her computer chimed with a new email. Her heart lurched as she saw it was from the same anonymous address. Did you enjoy your meeting last night? The old warehouse was a nice touch. Very dramatic. They'd been followed. Wash. The realization sent ice through Rebecca's veins. You're running out of time. Tick-tock. Rebecca's hands flew across the keyboard, typing a reply. What do you want from us? Money? We can pay you. Just tell us what you want. The response came almost immediately. I don't want your money. I want justice for Daniel. I want the truth. Who are you? No response. Rebecca spent the morning classes in a fog, going through the motions of her job while her mind raced through possibilities. Who could know? Who could have been there that night? She thought about the school security cameras, but they'd made sure to disable those. She thought about witnesses, but the school had been empty, everyone gone home for the evening. Or had they? An idea struck her. She pulled up the school's records from October 15, 2024, looking at detention logs, after-school activity schedules, anything that might indicate who else had been on campus that night. Their drama club rehearsal had run until 10 o'clock. The fall play had been in full production. But everyone should have been gone by the time they'd arrived at 11:30. Unless someone had stayed behind. Rebecca grabbed her phone and called Michael Torres. I need you to pull your coaching records from fall of 2024, she said without preamble. Anyone who had late practice, anyone who might have been around campus after hours. On it, Michael said. He sounded exhausted, like he hadn't slept either. Her next call was to Jennifer. Check your counseling appointments from that week, Rebecca instructed. Anyone you saw late, anyone who might have had access to the building after normal hours. By lunchtime, they'd compiled a list of 15 students who'd had legitimate reasons to be on campus that evening. Cross-referencing with current enrollment, they narrowed it down to 8 who were still at Riverside High. Rebecca stared at the names, her stomach churning. Sarah Chin, Senior Drama Club President. Tyler Morrison, Senior Football Team Captain. Emma Rodriguez, Junior Student Council Member. David Kim, Senior Robotics Team. Ashley Thompson, Senior Choir. James Wright, Junior Basketball Team. Olivia Martinez, Senior Debate Team. Lucas Anderson, Junior Engineering Club. 8 students. 8 possible witnesses to their crime. One of them was destroying their lives. Rebecca made a decision that made her hate herself even more than she already did. She would investigate these students, dig into their lives, find out which one knew their secret. And then, what? She didn't let herself think that far ahead. She started with the security footage from the present day, looking for anyone who might have delivered the letter to her office. The cameras showed the usual morning rush of students, teachers, parents. Then at 7:15, a figure in a dark hoodie approached the front entrance, slipped something through the mail slot and walked away. The person kept their face down, avoiding the cameras with the expertise of someone who knew exactly where they were. But there was something about the walk, the build. Rebecca zoomed in, enhanced the image. The person was wearing dark jeans and sneakers. Not much to go on. But then she noticed something. A small pin on the hoodie's left side. She enhanced it further. It was the robotics club pin. The same one Daniel Park had worn every single day. David Kim. It had to be. Rebecca's hands trembled as she pulled up David's file. He was a senior just like Daniel had been. Straight A's just like Daniel. Accepted to MIT just like Daniel. And Daniel's best friend. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. David had been Daniel's lab partner, his closest confidant. If Daniel had told anyone about what he'd discovered, it would have been David. Rebecca picked up the phone to call the others, then stopped. A thought occurred to her, dark and desperate. If David was working alone, if he didn't have copies of the evidence distributed anywhere, then maybe there was a way to stop this without confessing. Maybe there was a way to protect themselves. The thought made her sick, but she couldn't ignore it. They'd already crossed one moral line. What was one more? She was interrupted by a knock at her door. Maria poked her head in. Mrs. Walsh? There's a student here to see you. Says it's urgent. Who? David Kim. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Send him in. The boy who entered her office looked so much like Daniel that for a moment, Rebecca thought she was seeing a ghost. Same dark hair, same intense eyes, same quiet confidence. But where Daniel had radiated warmth and trust, David's expression was cold, calculating. Thank you for seeing me, Principal Walsh, David said, sitting down without being invited. I wanted to talk to you about something important. Of course, David. What's on your mind? David leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made Rebecca want to squirm. I've been thinking a lot about Daniel lately. About what happened to him. Rebecca forced her face to remain neutral. We all miss Daniel. He was a special student. He was my best friend, David said quietly. We told each other everything. Every secret. Every fear. Every discovery. The emphasis on the last word was unmistakable. David, Rebecca began, but he held up a hand. I know you're busy, Principal Walsh. I won't take up much of your time. I just wanted you to know that I haven't forgotten about Daniel. I think about him every single day. And I've made it my mission to find out what really happened to him. He stood up, moving toward the door. Then he paused, turning back to face her. Oh, and Mrs. Walsh? I hope you have a good rest of your week. I have a feeling Friday is going to be very interesting. He left, closing the door gently behind him. Rebecca sat frozen in her chair, her worst fears confirmed. David Kim knew. And in 3 days, unless they did something, their lives were over. That afternoon, Rebecca called an emergency meeting in her office. Michael, Jennifer, and Marcus arrived within minutes, their faces etched with worry. It's David Kim, Rebecca announced. I'm certain of it. She explained about the encounter, about the robotics pin on the hoodie, about David's thinly veiled threats. As she spoke, she watched the color drain from their faces. Daniel's best friend, Jennifer whispered. Of course. Why didn't we think of that before? Because we wanted to believe we'd gotten away with it, Marcus said bitterly. Because we're cowards who convinced ourselves that our silence was somehow justified. We can still fix this, Michael said, but he didn't sound convinced. How? Marcus demanded. The boy clearly has evidence. He's been planning this for 2 years. What are we supposed to do, Marcus? What's your brilliant solution? The room fell silent. Rebecca knew what they were all thinking, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. There had been one permanent solution before. There could be again. No, she said firmly, even as the thought made her want to vomit. We're not going down that road again. We're not monsters. Aren't we? Michael asked quietly. After what we did to Daniel, what else would you call us? Rebecca stood up, began pacing. We need to talk to David. Find out exactly what he has, what he wants. Maybe we can reason with him. Reason with him? Jennifer laughed harshly. We killed his best friend and covered it up for 2 years. What makes you think he's interested in reason? He said he wants the truth, Rebecca countered. Maybe if we confess, if we turn ourselves in, he'll be satisfied. Maybe he'll show mercy. Mercy, Marcus repeated. We showed Daniel mercy, didn't we? Right before we... Don't, Rebecca cut him off. Don't say it. I can't hear it out loud. But the words hung in the air anyway, the truth they'd been running from for 2 years. They hadn't just covered up an accident. What they'd done was so much worse. Rebecca's mind drifted back to that night, to the phone call that had changed everything. It had been Jennifer who'd called her, Jennifer's voice high and panicked. Rebecca, you have to come to the school. No. There's been an accident with Daniel Park. It's bad. It's really bad. Rebecca had driven through the dark streets of Riverside, her mind conjuring terrible possibilities. A fall down the stairs. A car accident in the parking lot. Equipment malfunction in one of the labs. She hadn't been prepared for what she found. The conference room. Daniel on the floor. And standing over him, faces white with shock, Jennifer, Michael, and Marcus. What happened? Rebecca had demanded. It was Michael who'd answered, his voice hollow. We were trying to talk to him. To convince him to keep quiet about what he'd found. But he wouldn't listen. He said he was going to the superintendent the next morning, to the press if he had to. He said we were all corrupt, that we'd betrayed everything a school should stand for. So, Rebecca had said, not understanding yet. So Marcus got angry, Jennifer whispered. He grabbed Daniel, just trying to shut him up. But Daniel pulled away and he fell. Hit his head on the corner of the table. Rebecca had knelt beside Daniel's body, checking for a pulse she knew she wouldn't find. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Blood pooled beneath his head. "We have to call an ambulance," she'd said. "Call the police. This was an accident. We can explain." "No," Marcus had cut her off. "Don't you understand? Even if they believe it was an accident, the truth about the embezzlement will come out. About the money I took. About Michael's program being funded illegally. About Jennifer's husband's involvement. We'll all be ruined." "So what are you suggesting?" Rebecca had asked, even though part of her already knew. "We make this go away," Marcus said. "We stage a disappearance. Say Daniel ran away. It happens all the time with teenagers. Parents fight, kids get stressed, they run. No one will question it too hard." "That's insane," Rebecca had said. But even as she protested, her mind was racing through the implications of the truth coming out. Her career destroyed. Her reputation shattered. Criminal charges for embezzlement conspiracy. Her daughter's college fund drained by legal fees. "Think about your family," Jennifer had urged. "Think about all the students who depend on this school. If this comes out, Riverside will be shut down. All our programs, all the good we've done, it'll all be destroyed because of one mistake." One mistake. As if Daniel Park's life was just a footnote in their story. And God help her, Rebecca had agreed. They'd spent the next 6 hours cleaning up evidence, disabling security cameras, creating a narrative. They'd wrapped Daniel's body in a tarp, put it in Marcus's trunk, and driven to a construction site on the edge of town where new condos were being built. They'd buried him in what would become the foundation of a luxury apartment building. By the time the sun rose, Daniel Park had simply disappeared. And Rebecca Walsh had become a murderer. Now, sitting in her office with her co-conspirators, Rebecca understood that they'd never really escaped that night. The guilt had been eating them alive from the inside, rotting their souls, turning them into hollow shells pretending to be human. Maybe David Kim wasn't their enemy. Maybe he was their salvation. "I'm going to talk to him," Rebecca announced. "Tomorrow morning. I'm going to tell him everything." "Rebecca, no," Michael protested. "We need to think this through." "I've done enough thinking," Rebecca cut him off. 2 years of thinking. 2 years of lying to Daniel's mother, of watching her search for a son she'll never find. "I'm done." "What about us?" Jennifer demanded. "You're not the only one who'll go down if you confess." "Then confess with me," Rebecca challenged. "Or don't." "But I'm not carrying this anymore." She left the office, leaving the others to argue among themselves. For the first time in 2 years, Rebecca Walsh felt something close to relief. The secret had been a prison. Now, finally, she was going to break free. Even if it destroyed her in the process. Rebecca didn't sleep at all that night. She sat at her kitchen table, writing a letter to her daughter, trying to explain the inexplicable. How did you tell someone you loved that you were a killer? How did you make them understand the choices you'd made, the desperation that had driven you to such evil? In the end, she couldn't. She tore up the letter and wrote a simpler one. "I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me." At 6 in the morning, she drove to the school. The campus was quiet, the first hints of dawn painting the sky pink and gold. She remembered her first day as principal, how proud she'd felt walking through these halls. How determined she'd been to make a difference. She'd made a difference all right. Just not the kind she'd dreamed of. David Kim's car was already in the student parking lot. Rebecca felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation as she made her way to the robotics lab, where she knew she'd find him. Sure enough, David was there working on some complicated circuit board. He didn't look up when she entered. "I've been expecting you," he said calmly. Rebecca closed the door behind her. "Then you know why I'm here." "To confess." David finally looked at her, his eyes cold. "Or to try to convince me to keep quiet?" "To confess," Rebecca said. "To tell you everything. And to turn myself in to the police." For the first time, she saw emotion crack through David's controlled facade. Surprise quickly followed by suspicion. "Just like that? After 2 years of lying, you're suddenly ready to tell the truth." "Not suddenly," Rebecca said quietly. "I've been ready for a long time. I just didn't have the courage." She pulled out a chair and sat down. "Daniel was your best friend. You deserve to know what happened to him." David's hands clenched into fists on the workbench. "I already know what happened. I know about the embezzlement, about the cover-up, about all of you protecting your precious careers while my best friend's body was rotting in the ground." "You're right," Rebecca said. "About all of it. We were cowards. We are cowards. And Daniel deserved so much better. He deserved to live." David's voice cracked, years of suppressed grief and rage finally breaking through. He deserved to expose you all and go to MIT and change the world. But you took that from him. You took everything. Tears streamed down David's face now, his composure completely shattered. Rebecca felt her own eyes burning. I know, she whispered. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for that. But first I need to tell you the whole truth. You deserve to hear it from me. She told him everything. About the phone call that night, about finding Daniel's body, about the terrible decision they'd made. She told him about the burial, about the lies they'd told his mother, about every moment of guilt and shame that had consumed her for 2 years. When she finished, the lab was silent except for the hum of equipment and their ragged breathing. Where is he? David asked finally. Where did you bury him? Rebecca told him the address of the apartment building, the exact location where Daniel's body lay beneath concrete and steel. His mother needs to know, David said. She needs to be able to bury him properly. I know. And I'll tell her. I'll tell everyone. Rebecca pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police right now. Wait. David held up a hand. Before you do that, I need you to understand something. Rebecca paused, finger hovering over the screen. I've spent 2 years planning this moment, David continued. 2 years gathering evidence, documenting everything. I have copies of financial records, testimony from students who saw you all meeting that night, analysis of the security camera blackout. I've built an airtight case against all of you. Good, Rebecca said. You should. We deserve to be held accountable. But here's what you don't know, David said, his voice hardening. I also have evidence that could destroy innocent people. Teachers who had nothing to do with Daniel's death but who were complicit in the embezzlement cover-up. Students whose scholarships were funded with stolen money. Parents who made donations based on false information about the school's finances. Rebecca felt sick. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you go to the police right now, if you tell the whole truth, you won't be the only ones who suffer. This will destroy dozens of innocent lives. Families will be torn apart. Students will lose their scholarships, their futures. The entire school will be shut down. Then what do you want? Rebecca demanded. You said you wanted the truth. You said you wanted justice. I want both, David said. But I want it done right. Not in a way that creates more victims. He pulled out a flash drive from his pocket and held it up. This contains everything. All my evidence, all my documentation. Tomorrow is Friday. That's when I'm going to release it. But not to the police. Not yet. Then who? To Daniel's mother, David said. She deserves to know first. She deserves to decide how justice is served. Rebecca thought about Mrs. Park, about the woman who'd spent 2 years wondering if her son was alive somewhere, suffering, needing help. About the hope and grief that must war in her heart every single day. And after that? Rebecca asked. After that, she decides what happens next. If she wants to go to the police, we go to the police. If she wants a public trial, we have a public trial. If she wants you all to confess publicly and face the consequences, that's what happens. Her son was taken from her. She gets to determine how justice is served. It was more mercy than they deserved. Rebecca knew that. But she also knew David was right. This wasn't just about them anymore. It never had been. Okay, she said. We'll do it your way. David nodded slowly. There's one more thing. The others. Torres, Blackwell, Webb. They need to know what's happening. They need to be there when we tell Mrs. Park. They won't agree to that. Then convince them. Or I release everything to the media tonight, and innocent people get caught in the crossfire. Rebecca stood up, her legs shaky. I'll tell them. As she turned to leave, David spoke again. Principal Walsh? She looked back. Thank you for telling me the truth. Finally. The words should have brought comfort. Instead, they made Rebecca feel even worse. 2 years. 2 years of lying when all she'd had to do was find the courage to speak. She left the robotics lab and went to make the hardest phone calls of her life. They gathered in the conference room the next morning. The same conference room where Daniel Park had died. Rebecca wondered if the others felt the ghost of that night as strongly as she did. Michael Torres arrived first, his face haggard. He'd aged a decade in the past few days. Jennifer Blackwell came next, her usual polished appearance disheveled. She'd been crying. Marcus Webb was last, moving like a man walking to his execution. This is insane, Jennifer said as soon as everyone was seated. We can't just confess to his mother. She'll call the police immediately. We'll be arrested before we can even leave. Maybe that's what we deserve, Marcus said quietly. Maybe it's time to stop running. Easy for you to say, Michael snapped. You're 62. You've lived your life. I'm 38. I have 40 years ahead of me. 40 years that will be spent in prison if we do this. You should have thought of that before you helped cover up a murder, Rebecca said coldly. We all helped. Michael stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Don't act like you're better than us, Rebecca. You made the same choice we did. I know. And I'm going to face the consequences of that choice. Starting today. The door opened. David Kim entered, followed by a small Korean woman with graying hair and tired eyes. Mrs. Park. Rebecca's heart stopped. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't prepared herself to face the woman whose life they'd destroyed. Mrs. Park looked around the room, her gaze settling on each of them in turn. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. David called me last night. He told me you all wanted to speak with me about Daniel. Rebecca stood on shaking legs. Mrs. Park, we. Sit down, Principal Walsh. Mrs. Park pulled out a chair and sat, folding her hands on the table. I've spent 2 years searching for answers. I can wait a few more minutes to hear what you have to say. The simple dignity of the woman broke something inside Rebecca. She sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. We killed your son, she said. The words came out as barely a whisper, but in the silent room they echoed like a scream. We killed Daniel and we covered it up and we let you believe he might still be alive somewhere, and I am so sorry. Mrs. Park's face didn't change. She sat perfectly still, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Tell me everything, she said. So they did. One by one they each shared their part in the tragedy. Marcus talked about the embezzlement, about how Daniel had discovered it, about the desperation that had made him lash out. Michael talked about the cover-up, about his cowardice in going along with the plan. Jennifer talked about lying to Daniel's mother, about every false lead and empty hope she'd encouraged. And Rebecca talked about being the person who should have protected Daniel, who should have created a safe environment where a student could report corruption without fear. About failing in the most fundamental duty of an educator. When they finished, the room was silent except for the sound of Jennifer's quiet sobbing. Mrs. Park sat motionless for a long moment. Then she spoke. Where is my son's body? Rebecca gave her the address, explained about the construction site, the concrete foundation. Mrs. Park wrote it down carefully in a small notebook. I want to see it, she said. I want to see where you put him. Of course, Rebecca said. We'll take you there right now. No. Mrs. Park's voice was firm. David will take me. I don't want to see any of you again until the police arrive. You're calling the police? Jennifer asked, her voice breaking. Mrs. Park looked at her with an expression that held no pity, no anger, just a terrible sadness. Did you think I wouldn't? You killed my child. My only child. You buried him like trash and you lied to me for 2 years. Of course I'm calling the police. She stood up, moving toward the door where David waited. Before she left, she turned back one last time. Daniel trusted you, she said, looking at each of them. He believed in the goodness of teachers, of schools, of the adults who were supposed to guide him. You didn't just take his life. You took his faith in humanity. The door closed behind her with a soft click. They sat in silence, waiting for the sirens they knew would come. The police arrived within an hour. Detective Sarah Morrison and her partner, Detective James Chin, entered the conference room with the wary expressions of people who'd seen too much human evil. We've just come from speaking with Mrs. Park and David Kim, Detective Morrison said. They've made some serious allegations. We need each of you to come down to the station to make a statement. We'll come willingly, Rebecca said. We're ready to confess to everything. Rebecca, no, Jennifer pleaded. We should talk to lawyers first. We should. We should tell the truth, Rebecca cut her off. For once in 2 years we should do the right thing. At the police station they were separated into different interrogation rooms. Rebecca sat across from Detective Morrison, a recording device between them. I'm going to read you your rights, the detective said. I understand. But I'm waiving my right to an attorney. I want to tell you everything. And she did. Every detail, every decision, every moment of that horrible night. When she finished, Detective Morrison sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. You understand that you're confessing to murder, obstruction of justice, abuse of a corpse, and conspiracy? Yes. And you understand that this confession will likely result in a lengthy prison sentence? Yes. Why are you doing this? Why confess now, after 2 years of getting away with it? Rebecca thought about Daniel's face in the photograph David had shown her. Thought about Mrs. Park's quiet dignity. Thought about the weight she'd carried for 2 years, the guilt that had poisoned every moment of her life. Because living with what I did was worse than any prison sentence could be, she said simply. The others weren't as cooperative. Michael lawyered up immediately, refusing to say anything without representation. Jennifer gave a statement but tried to minimize her role, claiming she'd been coerced by the others. Marcus, to Rebecca's surprise, confessed fully, his voice hollow with exhaustion and regret. By evening, all 4 of them were under arrest. The story broke on the local news, then went national. Principal and 3 staff members arrested in murder of student, the headline screamed. 2-year cover-up at Riverside High School exposed. Rebecca's daughter called from college, crying so hard she could barely speak. Rebecca's ex-husband called, his voice cold with disgust. Friends she'd known for decades sent texts saying they never wanted to see her again. And through it all, Rebecca felt a strange sense of peace. The secret was out. The lies were over. Whatever came next, at least it would be true. The construction site was cordoned off with police tape. News helicopters circled overhead as forensic teams carefully excavated the foundation of the luxury apartment building. Rebecca watched from the police car, handcuffed but allowed to observe. Mrs. Park stood nearby, supported by David Kim and several family members who'd flown in from Korea. It took 8 hours of careful work before they found him. Daniel Park's remains, wrapped in the tarp they'd used 2 years ago, preserved by the concrete that had sealed him in. Mrs. Park collapsed when they brought him out. Her wails of grief cut through Rebecca like a knife, each sound a reminder of the irreparable harm they'd caused. David stood rigid, tears streaming down his face, his hands clenched so tight they shook. Rebecca saw him mouth words she couldn't hear, a goodbye to the friend he'd lost, the justice he'd fought for. The news cameras captured everything. Daniel's mother's grief. The body bag being loaded into the coroner's van. Rebecca's face in the police car window, watching the aftermath of her crimes. By the next morning, the story had exploded across the country. Riverside had become synonymous with corruption and betrayal. Parents were pulling their students from the school. Teachers were resigning. The school board announced that Riverside High would be closed indefinitely pending a full investigation. And in a cell at the county jail, Rebecca watched it all unfold on a small television, knowing that she'd destroyed not just one life but hundreds. The trial began 6 months later. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, using David's evidence combined with the confessions from Rebecca and Marcus. Michael and Jennifer had pled not guilty, but their lawyers couldn't overcome the weight of testimony against them. The courtroom was packed every day. Mrs. Park sat in the front row, her face a mask of dignified grief. Daniel's extended family filled the seats behind her. On the other side of the aisle, Rebecca's daughter attended every day, her face tear-stained but determined to support her mother despite everything. The testimony was devastating. Forensic experts described how Daniel had died, the trauma to his skull consistent with a fall onto the conference room table. Financial experts detailed the embezzlement scheme that had started it all. Students who'd been on campus that night described seeing the administrator's cars in the parking lot at odd hours. And David Kim took the stand, describing his 2-year investigation, the pain of knowing his best friend was dead while everyone pretended he'd simply run away. Daniel was the best person I ever knew, David said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. He believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. Even when it cost him. And they killed him for it. When it was Rebecca's turn to testify, she told the truth. All of it. She didn't try to minimize her role or shift blame. She described her cowardice, her selfishness, her prioritization of her career over a student's life. I failed Daniel in every possible way, she said. As an educator, as an adult, as a human being. I can never undo what I did. But I can at least ensure that the truth is known. The defense attorneys tried to paint the death as an accident, to argue that the cover-up was a moment of panic rather than premeditated evil. But the jury saw through it. After just 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts. The sentencing hearing was held a month later. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at each defendant in turn before speaking. This court has seen many terrible crimes, she said. But few have been as fundamentally betraying as this one. The defendants held positions of trust. They were responsible for the safety and well-being of children. And when one of those children discovered wrongdoing and tried to do the right thing, they killed him. Then they compounded that evil by lying to his mother for 2 years, by allowing her to suffer in ignorance, by stealing from her the ability to grieve properly. She sentenced Marcus Webb to 25 years for manslaughter and conspiracy. Michael Torres to 20 years for conspiracy and obstruction. Jennifer Blackwell to 18 years for the same. and Rebecca Walsh to 30 years with no possibility of parole for 20. You were the principal, the judge said to Rebecca. You held the highest position of trust. Your betrayal was the most egregious. Rebecca stood to make a statement before being taken into custody. Your Honor, there is nothing I can say that will make this right. There is no apology sufficient for what I've done. But I want Mrs. Park and David Kim to know that I will spend every day of my sentence trying to become the person I should have been. The person Daniel deserved to have as his principal. She turned to face Mrs. Park directly. I'm sorry, she said simply. I know it means nothing. But I am so sorry. Mrs. Park stood. For a moment, Rebecca thought she might speak, might offer some word of forgiveness or condemnation. But instead, she simply turned and walked out of the courtroom, her silence more damning than any words could have been. Rebecca sat in the prison library, helping a younger inmate with her GED preparation. It had become her purpose in this place, teaching those who wanted to learn, trying in some small way to be the educator she'd failed to be when it mattered. She'd aged in prison. Gray streaked her hair now and lines creased her face. But there was also a peace in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The peace of someone who'd stopped running from their sins. A guard approached. Walsh, you have a visitor. Rebecca followed her to the visiting room, wondering who it could be. Her daughter visited monthly, but she'd just been here the week before. She stopped short when she saw David Kim sitting at one of the tables. He'd graduated from MIT, she knew. Had started working for a robotics company in Boston. She'd never expected to see him again. David, she said as she sat down. I'm surprised you came. I needed to see you, David said. To tell you something. Rebecca waited, her heart pounding. Mrs. Park died 3 months ago, David said quietly. Heart attack. The doctors said it was quick. Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. I'm so sorry. Before she died, she wrote letters. To you, to the others. I've been delivering them. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. Rebecca's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single page in Mrs. Park's careful handwriting. Dear Principal Walsh, I've spent 5 years trying to forgive you. I have prayed for the strength to let go of my anger, to find peace with what happened to my son. I cannot honestly say I have succeeded. But I can say this, I believe you are truly sorry. I believe you have suffered for what you did, and I believe you are trying to become a better person. Daniel believed that people could change, could grow, could learn from their mistakes. He had more faith in humanity than I ever did. Perhaps that faith is what got him killed. But I want to honor his memory by trying to have that same faith. So I forgive you, Rebecca Walsh. Not because you deserve it, but because my son would have wanted me to. I hope you use your remaining years to do good in the world. I hope you become the person Daniel thought you could be. Mrs. Park. Rebecca sobbed, the letter clutched in her hands. David sat quietly, letting her cry. When she finally composed herself, she looked up at him. Thank you for bringing this to me. There's something else, David said. I've started a foundation in Daniel's name. It provides scholarships for students who want to study engineering and robotics. And it also supports programs that help students safely report corruption and wrongdoing in schools. That's beautiful, Rebecca said. I want you to help with it, David said. When you get out. I want you to speak to students about what happened, about the importance of integrity, about the cost of silence. I want you to help make sure what happened to Daniel never happens to anyone else. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. You would trust me to do that? Daniel trusted you once, David said. I think he'd want you to have a chance to earn that trust back. It was more than she deserved. More grace than she'd ever hoped for. But she nodded, accepting the responsibility. I'll do it, she said. I promise. 15 years after Daniel Park's death, Rebecca Walsh stood in front of a high school auditorium filled with students. She was 66 years old now, her hair completely gray, her face lined with age and hard-won wisdom. She'd been released from prison 3 years earlier, after serving 20 years of her sentence. The parole board had granted her early release based on her exemplary behavior and her work helping other inmates. True to her promise to David, she dedicated her freedom to the Daniel Park Foundation. She traveled to schools across the country, telling her story, warning students and teachers alike about the dangers of prioritizing reputation over integrity. Today she was at Riverside High School. The school had reopened 10 years ago under new administration, with strict ethics policies and anonymous reporting systems for students. A memorial to Daniel Park stood in the front courtyard, a bronze statue of a young man looking toward the future with hope and determination. Rebecca stood before the students and began to speak. My name is Rebecca Walsh. 20 years ago, I was the principal of this school. And 20 years ago, I committed the worst crime an educator can commit. I betrayed the trust of a student who came to me for help. I let him die and then I covered it up. She told them everything. The embezzlement, the confrontation, the terrible choices made in desperation and fear. She told them about the 2 years of lies, the arrest, the trial, the prison sentence. And she told them about the cost. Not just to Daniel and his mother, but to everyone whose lives had been touched by their crimes. I can never undo what I did, she said. I can never bring Daniel Park back. But I can make sure that his death meant something. I can make sure that you all understand the importance of speaking up when you see something wrong, even when it's hard. Even when it's scary. She paused, looking out at the sea of young faces. Daniel Park was 17 years old when he died. He was smart, kind, and brave. He saw corruption and he refused to stay silent. And that courage cost him his life. But his courage also changed the world. Because of Daniel, there are now programs in schools across the country to protect whistleblowers. Because of Daniel, there are scholarships helping hundreds of students pursue their dreams. Because of Daniel, people like me have had to face the consequences of our actions and work to become better. She saw several students crying. Saw teachers in the back row nodding, their faces serious. Don't let anyone make you believe that staying silent is safer, Rebecca said. Don't let fear or pressure make you compromise your integrity. Because the truth always comes out eventually. And the cost of lies is always higher than the cost of truth. When she finished, the auditorium was silent. Then one student began to clap. Then another. Soon the entire room was applauding, not for her but for the message. For Daniel's memory. After the assembly, a young girl approached her. She couldn't have been more than 15, with nervous eyes and a backpack covered in engineering pins. Mrs. Walsh, the girl said quietly. I saw something. Something wrong at my school. And I've been too scared to report it. But after hearing your story, I think I have to. Rebecca knelt down to the girl's level. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah, telling the truth is the bravest thing you can do. And I promise you, if you report what you saw, there are people who will protect you. The world has changed since Daniel's time. We've learned from what happened to him. The girl nodded, tears in her eyes. Will you help me? Of course, Rebecca said. That's why I'm here. As she watched Sarah walk away with renewed determination, Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Hope. Not for herself, but for a generation of students who would grow up in a world where Daniel Park's sacrifice had meant something. She looked up at the sky, wondering if somehow, somewhere, Daniel knew. Knew that his death had sparked a change, had made schools safer, had given courage to countless students who faced their own moral dilemmas. The last bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Students poured out of the building, their laughter and chatter filling the air with life and possibility. Rebecca stood by Daniel's memorial statue, placing her hand on the cold bronze. I hope I've made you proud, she whispered. I hope I've finally become the person you believed I could be. The statue stared toward the horizon, frozen in eternal hope. And Rebecca Walsh, former principal, convicted murderer and redeemed educator, turned to face her future, ready to spend however many years she had left ensuring that Daniel Park's legacy was one of justice, truth, and the courage to do what's right no matter the cost. In the distance, the American flag fluttered in the autumn breeze, a reminder of the ideals the country was built on. Liberty, justice, and the fundamental belief that truth, though sometimes buried, will always find its way to light. Daniel Park had believed in those ideals. And now, because of him, so did Rebecca Walsh. The story of Riverside High School would never be forgotten. It would be taught in ethics classes, discussed in teacher training programs, referenced in policy debates. But more than that, it would live on in the hearts of every student who found the courage to speak up, every educator who chose integrity over convenience, every person who decided that some truths were worth any cost. That was Daniel's gift to the world. And it was a gift that would keep giving, long after everyone involved had turned to dust. The sun set over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Rebecca walked to her car, her heart lighter than it had been in decades. She had 15 years of freedom ahead of her, 15 years to continue Daniel's work, to help students, to be the educator she should have been all along. It wasn't redemption. She didn't deserve that. But it was purpose. It was meaning. It was a chance to turn the worst thing she'd ever done into something that might, somehow, make the world a little bit better.